A residential complex for artists with around-the-clock security. Video cameras on every corner. A close-knit community where everyone knows each other. A place that seemed completely safe. But it was here that a young girl disappeared in broad daylight, and what happened next shocked the entire city. Youth does not protect from mistakes. Everyone has stumbled at least once. But not everyone does things so terrible that parents are ready to disown their own daughter. The year is 2015. Madison Middleton, whom everyone just called Maddie, had just celebrated another birthday. The only daughter in the family, she lived with her mother and father at the Tannery Residential Complex, a unique place in Santa Cruz, California. It was a complex of affordable, loft-style housing created specifically for families of creative professionals. A theater, art studios, dance halls, everything was located right on the premises. The walls inside were painted in muted tones. The hallways smelled of paint and wood. In the evenings, the sounds of a piano, a violin, and the muffled voice of an actress rehearsing a monologue drifted from the windows. The result was a small but very friendly community where people knew each other by name. It seemed like the ideal place for living, creating, and raising future artists. The young children of the resident families played freely in the courtyards, able to socialize without fear for their well-being. Mothers sat on benches with cups of coffee. Fathers returned from work in the evening, greeted their neighbors, and knew which child belonged to whom. Security was provided by 24/7 surveillance cameras, a perimeter fence, and a guard at the entrance who didn't let strangers in. The guard in the booth at the gate knew everyone by sight. He would nod. He recorded visitors in a logbook. Everything ran like clockwork. From a young age, Madison stood out for her creative abilities and talent. She loved to draw, with pencils, markers, chalk on the pavement, and would make up her own stories for each drawing. She could sit for an hour at a table, bent over a sheet of paper, the tip of her tongue sticking out in concentration. Her mother would sometimes peek in. The girl would be drawing without distraction, completely absorbed in the process. An open and kind girl, so sociable that neighbors nicknamed her Chatty Maddie. She made friends easily and could connect with anyone. She could walk up to an adult she had never seen before and start a conversation about her drawing, the weather, anything at all. She smiled broadly, without shyness. She loved wolves more than anything in the world. She drew them constantly and dreamed of decorating her entire room with them. Several of her works already hung on the wall above her bed. Wolves howled at the moon, ran through the forest, and stared with yellow eyes from the paper. Her mother promised that they would soon go to the store and buy posters. The girl was waiting for that day. The Tannery complex was located in a quiet, prosperous neighborhood among similar buildings that were popular with families with children. The streets were clean. Trees grew along the sidewalks. In the mornings, people walked their dogs. Everything seemed calm, measured, and safe. The Middletons moved here right after their wedding. They wanted a quiet life and a reliable place to raise their daughters. Laura worked at the local library. Her husband was a graphic designer. Both spent a lot of time at home. Both adored their daughter. Their second-floor apartment was filled with drawings, books, and toys. But a cruel disappointment awaited them. Sunday, July 26, 2015. The morning began as usual. The heroine of this story spent the day with her family, preparing for the upcoming school week. She laid out her textbooks on the table. She checked her backpack. Her mother ironed her school uniform. That day, a friend came to visit Laura. The young women decided to play a board game. They got out the box and laid the cards on the table. Maddie joined them at first, sitting nearby, but she quickly got bored. She wasn't interested. She fidgeted in her chair, looked out the window, and sighed. She had recently been given a white scooter that she was very eager to try out in the courtyard. Brand new, shiny, with blue wheels. The girl had already walked over to it several times, touching the handlebars, spinning a wheel. Her mother noticed this. She gave her permission. The girl regularly played outside alone. It was safe here, and her parents didn't worry. She knew where she could ride. She knew the neighborhood kids, and she knew not to go outside the gates. The rules were simple and clear. After lunch, Madison went out to the complex's inner courtyard. She put on her helmet and took her scooter. Her mother helped her fasten the strap under her chin. The girl smiled and ran out. She wanted to ride around and show it off to the others. There were still several hours until dark. The sun was high in the sky. It was hot. Neighbors saw her until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The girl rode carefree along the paved paths, maneuvering around benches, laughing. Everything seemed normal. Her hair streamed out from under her helmet, her purple dress too. She would speed up, brake, and turn around. Her mother also looked out the window from time to check on how her daughter was doing. She would see the white scooter flashing between the trees. She would see the purple dress. Reassured, she would return to her friend and their game. Everything was under control. Other kids periodically came up, and Maddie would happily chat with them and let them try her new ride. A boy of about 10 rode it for a couple of minutes. A younger girl asked to try it too. Maddie let everyone have a turn. She stood by, waited for her turn, and talked. Everything was fine. It was an ordinary day. Around 5 in the evening, Laura glanced out the window one more time. The girl was talking to another girl her age. They were standing by a bench, chatting and laughing about something. Her mother smiled. Everything was fine. She had no idea she was looking at her daughter for the last time. A few minutes passed. Her friend was telling a story, waving her hands, laughing. Laura was half listening, nodding, looking at the game cards. But suddenly she had an anxious feeling, inexplicable and sharp. A mother's instinct. Something was wrong. She stood up and went to the window. She looked out. Madison was nowhere to be seen. The white scooter was gone too. The courtyard was empty. A few kids were playing by the far wall, but her daughter was not among them. The woman decided to go outside, find her daughter, and make sure everything was okay. She assumed she had met a friend and had just stepped aside to chat. Nothing to worry about. I'll find her now. But when the young woman went out into the courtyard, she realized with horror the girl was really gone. Nowhere. She walked along the paths. She looked around the corner of the building. She walked around the playground. She checked by the dumpsters. Nothing. She covered the entire grounds, calling her name several times. No answer. Only an echo from the walls. Silence. Somewhere above, a window latch clicked. A bird flew by. Nothing else. The mother tried to calm down, not to give in to panic. She breathed deeply. She told herself, "It's okay, she's nearby." She kept telling herself that her daughter had simply gone to visit someone without permission. Although this was completely out of character for Maddie, the girl always asked for permission, always let them know. But any other options seemed too frightening, too impossible. There were about 100 apartments in the complex. The woman began checking with acquaintances, first those who lived on their floor. She knocked on doors. She asked, "Have you seen Maddie?" People shook their heads. They sympathized. They offered to help. Then she went to her daughter's friends, her classmates. She questioned neighbors. Each conversation took several minutes. Each answer was the same. "No, we haven't seen her." With every no, her anxiety grew. Even after talking to everyone who knew the Middleton family well and had young children, the girl still hadn't been found. An hour passed, then an hour and a half. The sun began to dip toward the horizon. The shadows grew longer. It was all very alarming. She decided to contact the police and report Madison missing. She dialed the number with trembling fingers. Her voice was breaking. But the authorities were in no hurry to raise the alarm. The disappearance did not meet a number of necessary criteria. The dispatcher asked questions in a calm, methodical tone. He took down the information. He said, "Wait a bit. Maybe she just got carried away playing." The mother told detectives in detail what her daughter had been doing that day. She described every hour. She provided a photograph and a detailed description, including her clothing. The missing girl was wearing a black helmet, matte, with a star-shaped sticker, a purple dress, light, summery, with little white flowers, white sneakers. Mrs. Middleton also mentioned the new white scooter, which was not in the courtyard. Blue wheels, blue handlebars. This provided a plausible explanation for her disappearance. Investigators reassured the worried woman, suggesting that Madison had simply gotten carried away riding her new scooter and had left the complex grounds. The detective spoke in an even, almost indifferent voice. For him, this was a routine situation. Kids run off, get lost, then are found. The statistics were on their side. Of course, this was also dangerous. The schoolgirl was very young, and it was already starting to get dark outside. The city was relatively safe, but still, she was alone. Cars on the roads, strangers. The theory that she had run away from home was not considered at all. The girl was too young and hadn't taken any of her things. No clothes, no toys, nothing. She had no reason to run away. A happy family, loving parents, everything was fine. Naturally, the woman hadn't managed to check all 100 apartments. That would have taken too much time. Police officers arrived at the complex around 6 in the evening. 2 detectives, another patrol officer. They began interviewing neighbors, methodically going from one apartment to the next. Unfortunately, people gave the same answers they had given the young mother. They had no idea where the girl had gone. Some hadn't seen the girl at all that day. Others had seen her in the morning, but not after lunch. No useful information. Then the detectives began reviewing the surveillance camera footage. They sat in the security room. The monitor screens glowed in the dim light. They rewound the footage, paused it, played it again. At the same time, they tried to calm the mother, who was in a state of extreme terror. She stood nearby, watching the screens, wiping away tears. Her hands were shaking. She insisted that this behavior was completely unlike her daughter. She was terrified and hoped for an Amber Alert, the abduction notification system. But the police hesitated. They needed solid grounds. For now, there were none. Maddie never left the inner courtyard, never even asked to. She showed no interest in what was beyond the gates. The complex had everything she needed: friends, a playground, trees, benches. She liked it there. Madison was indeed found on the camera footage. A detective paused the frame and pointed at the screen. There she is. Until 5:07 p.m., she was just riding around the courtyard, going around puddles left from watering the lawns. She chatted with others, stopped, laughed, and started again. But at 5:07 p.m., something changed. Something seemed to attract her attention. She stopped. She turned her head. She looked to the side. Then she rode in that direction, slowly, unhurriedly. What exactly distracted Madison remains a mystery. It's not visible in the footage. The camera was positioned at an angle. The shot only covered the courtyard, not the area she rode into. Worst of all, the girl moved out of the camera's line of sight. The last frame, the white scooter disappears around the corner of a building. Then, nothing. An empty courtyard. Swings swaying slowly in the wind. No one else. On weekends, many of the complex's residents were not home. Some had gone to visit relatives. Some were at their country house. Some were just out in the city for the day. No witnesses to her departure were found. From that moment, suspicions that she was missing began to solidify. It no longer looked like a simple accident. The police tried to find out if the girl had friends outside the complex. Maybe she had gone to visit someone in a neighboring house. But her relatives denied this. A few classmates lived in the city, but Maddie wasn't close friends with them. She socialized with them at school, but that was all. They were checked just in case. Their parents were called and asked. The schoolgirl was not found. A large-scale search began, involving the Santa Cruz Police Department. A unit with specially trained search dogs was brought into the operation. The German shepherds pulled on their leashes, sniffing the ground, their noses darting from side to side. The handlers followed, holding the leashes tightly. Unfortunately, it was starting to get dark. The sky turned orange, then pink, then gray. Streetlights came on. By evening, they had failed to find a single clue about the missing girl's direction of travel. The dogs lost the trail. They circled in place, whining, not knowing where to go next. Searching at night seemed futile, but concerned people, along with the Middleton family, did not stop and continued to look for the girl. They walked with flashlights. They looked in bushes, under cars, behind garages. They shouted her name. Silence was the only reply. However, this yielded no results. The search operation resumed in the morning. About 50 law enforcement officers, including canine units, joined the search. New dogs, fresh people, hope still flickered. They went through the apartments again, especially those that were empty and hadn't been opened the previous evening. They knocked louder. They demanded the doors be opened. They also asked people for access to their garages. They checked every vehicle, looking in trunks, shining flashlights underneath. They inspected the dumpsters. A detective put on gloves, lifted a lid, and looked inside. The smell was unpleasant. Flies buzzed around, but a job was a job. They combed every corner of the residential complex, but found nothing of value. No tracks, no clues. It was as if the girl had vanished into thin air. The authorities were forced to expand the search area. They finally held a press conference where they announced the young girl's disappearance. Journalists took notes, cameras rolled. Maddie's photograph appeared on television screens throughout the county. Police officials also emphasized that the entire complex had been searched, but nothing had been found. The chief of police stood at a podium reading from a sheet of paper. His voice was weary, his face was serious. Now they were combing an area of about 5 square miles around the residential building. This covered almost the entire city. Parks, vacant lots, the ocean shore, the industrial zone. They divided it into sectors. Each group got its own section. It seemed the situation was out of control, and the Middleton family's worst fears were beginning to come true. Therefore, more resources were needed for the case. On these grounds, they contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation. FBI agents arrived the next morning. Black suits, folders with documents. They began to coordinate the efforts. Neighbors, all of the missing girls' acquaintances and their families, as well as concerned citizens who couldn't stand aside, were already actively involved. People came and asked, "How can we help?" They were given a photograph and told, "Walk, ask, search." Loved ones supported the couple, but the mother and father were inconsolable. Laura barely slept. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was disheveled. Her husband held her, but he himself was on the verge of collapse. The only thing that could calm them was news that Maddie was alive and well. But the more time passed, the slimmer the chances became. The statistics are cruel. The first 48 hours are critical. In reality, the parents didn't stop for a second. When the police resumed the search on the morning of the second day, both were already exhausted from the emotional strain and hard work. They didn't eat. They drank only water and coffee. They walked, they asked, they searched. Detectives still insisted there were no grounds to believe the girl had been abducted. One of them said it outright. There are no signs of a forced removal, no witnesses, nothing. They assumed she was simply missing and would soon turn up on her own. Maybe she got lost. Maybe she was scared and hiding somewhere. Kids do that. By the evening of the second day of the search, they began stopping everyone entering the residential complex. A police officer stood at the gate with a tablet. He asked every driver questions. Investigators were interested in people who hadn't been there over the weekend. Where were you? Who were you with? When did you leave? When did you return? The frightening news spread throughout Santa Cruz. Local news sites published articles. The radio broadcast updates every hour. With each passing hour, more and more concerned people took an interest in the disappearance. Hundreds of volunteers arrived to help with the search. They came with their families, students from the local college, retirees, just city residents who wanted to help. In addition, the police received over 1,000 tips. Calls came from all over the county. They saw the girl here, they saw her there. Every lead had to be checked. Several dozen officers were assigned to check them. They sat in an office, answering calls, entering information into a database. They dispatched patrols to addresses. Most of the tips turned out to be false. People were mistaken. Confused children saw things that weren't there. Tension grew among the public. People wanted to find out what happened to the Middletons' daughter and to help the family. An atmosphere of anxiety settled over the city. Parents were reluctant to let their children play on the playground. They held their hands tighter. They looked over their shoulders more often. The 48-hour mark since her disappearance was relentlessly approaching. Everyone knew what that meant. After 2 days, the chances of finding a missing person alive drop sharply. The police, volunteers, and even the girl's parents felt they were moving in the wrong direction. They were searching in the wrong place, too wide, too far. It was decided to change the strategy and return to searching within the complex. They figured a more thorough inspection of the entire area was needed. Perhaps something had been missed. Perhaps they had looked in the wrong places. They would check all the apartments again, every single one. The underground parking garage, again, more carefully. They decided to inspect the cars that had been parked there for a long time, unmoved. Just an hour after this decision, law enforcement officers and a group of volunteers went down to the complex's underground parking garage. Fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered. It smelled of dampness and gasoline. Concrete walls. Water dripped somewhere in a corner. Here, one of the detectives looked into a dumpster, a large metal one standing by the far wall. He lifted the lid. He shone his flashlight inside. What he saw made him freeze for a second. Then he stepped back abruptly and closed the lid. He immediately ordered all the volunteers outside. He shouted, "Upstairs! Everyone upstairs! Right now!" People were confused, exchanging glances, but they obeyed. They cordoned off the area with yellow tape. The case was reclassified from a missing person to a homicide. They identified Madison by her clothing. The purple dress, the white sneakers. This was later confirmed by dental records. At 8 o'clock on the evening of July 27, 2015, a large sports bag was slowly and carefully removed from the container. Gray, worn. The zipper was closed. Inside was the girl, lying motionless. A forensic medical examination was to follow, which would help to understand what had happened and who was responsible. But it was already clear, this was not an accident. Crime scene investigators in white coveralls worked in the parking garage. They photographed the scene. They collected samples. Someone took measurements. Someone spoke into a radio. Bright flashes from cameras. It was determined that the bag had been thrown away on the very first day the search began. They checked the parking garage camera footage. It showed someone coming down, carrying the bag, and throwing it into the container. It could have been discovered immediately if they had looked more carefully. However, the perpetrator had been cautious. He had deliberately placed the object so that it wouldn't attract attention. He pushed it deep inside. He covered it with trash, bags, boxes, paper. This complicated the search, especially until detectives believed that something serious had happened. After reviewing the surveillance footage from the parking garage, a young man who also lived in the complex was arrested. The video clearly showed his face, his gait, his clothes. A most shocking thing was his age. The suspect was a teenager, essentially just a kid. Now, all the shocked local residents simply awaited the results of the law enforcement's work and conclusions. But for the investigators, the hardest part of the job was just beginning. They needed to process all the data quickly and build a solid case to press charges against the suspect. The schedule was tight. The prosecutor demanded results. Some worked without a break for days on coffee and adrenaline. Midason's parents were in shock. They were given the news in the parking garage. The mother sobbed. Her knees buckled. Her husband held her, but he himself was as white as a sheet. She couldn't believe what had happened. She screamed, "No, it's not her. It's a mistake." Medics took her directly from the underground garage to provide assistance. They gave her a sedative. They placed her on a gurney. They took her to the hospital. On July 28, at 9 in the evening, the local community gathered for a vigil dedicated to Madison. Hundreds of people, candles in their hands, silence, broken only by sobs. A photograph of the girl stood on a small table, surrounded by flowers, toys. One of the residents, who had learned that she loved wolves, came to say goodbye. He had a large dog, a husky Malamute mix that resembled the animal. He brought it with him. The dog lay down by the photograph and rested its head on its paws. People cried. During the investigation, it was established that everything happened in an apartment within the same residential complex where she lived with her family, literally just a few dozen meters from her home. Madison had been lured into the apartment under some pretext. It was likely she was promised ice cream or a chance to see something interesting. There, what happened changed everything forever. The medical examiner confirmed it. The young girl had been deprived of air. The clear marks told the story. Prints, bruises. In addition, she sustained an injury after she had already lost consciousness. They found signs of what had happened to her, multiple bruises, on her arms, legs, torso. They were all inflicted at the same time, on the same day. Despite the perpetrator's advantage, the girl had put up a fierce resistance. Scratches were found under her fingernails, skin particles. These would later be compared to the suspect's DNA. She had fought back. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough, not even to attract the attention of neighbors. The culprit had intentionally chosen a time when almost no one was around, a Sunday when many were away. Furthermore, he quickly immobilized Madison, likely by hitting her on the head with something heavy, stunning her. He sealed her mouth with wide tape. Traces of adhesive remained on her lips and cheeks. She was powerless against her attacker. The district attorney stated that the authorities had enough evidence to charge the teenager. He stood before the journalists, reading the indictment. His face was like stone. Given the brutality of the crime, it was proposed that he be tried as an adult. This was a rarity for the state of California, but precedents existed. For now, however, the matter was up in the air. Lawyers on both sides were preparing their arguments. In custody, was the young Adrian Gonzalez, whom everyone knew as AJ. For the past 6 years, he had lived in an apartment on the 3rd floor, above the garage where the bag was found. He lived with his mother. His father was not around. They had divorced when the boy was 8. Everyone who knew the young man was shocked and even thought the accusation was a mistake. A neighbor who lived across the hall told journalists, "It can't be. It's not him. I know this boy. He's not capable of something like this." Adrian was known as a calm and good-natured teenager, a polite boy living with his mother. He always said hello. He helped elderly neighbors carry their bags. He had never been involved in any legal trouble before, stayed away from questionable crowds and everything related to illicit substances. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink. Some decided that Adrian might have discovered the girl by accident. Maybe he found her somewhere already lifeless. He got scared that he would be blamed and held responsible for something he didn't do. So, he tried to hide what happened. But in reality, he was innocent. However, the detectives had a different opinion on the matter. There was too much evidence. His fingerprints were found on the bag, clear prints on the zipper and the handles. His own mother identified it as his sports bag. It had been in their storage closet. This meant it was taken from their home. Adrian had taken it. But the most convincing evidence were the traces proving he had crossed a line. Forensic analysis showed a 100% match with the suspect. The DNA analysis left no doubt. These traces could not have gotten there by accident. Adrian found it very easy to get along with younger children. He would show them how to do yo-yo tricks. He could stand in the courtyard for an hour, spinning it, tossing it, catching it. The kids would watch, fascinated. He even gave piano lessons. They had an old piano in their apartment, a gift from his grandmother. He played quite well. All the neighbors trusted him, treated him with respect, never suspecting how close they had let danger get to them. They left their daughters and sons with him. They asked him to babysit. They paid him for it. He was the perfect babysitter, responsible, attentive, patient. When investigators began to look into the young man's background, they immediately noticed warning signs. They had always been there, but no one had paid attention. After reviewing his social media pages, the police discovered numerous disturbing posts he had published over the last 2 years. They were ambiguous and frightening. They vaguely alluded to harming people, animals, and himself. Sometimes you just want to see what's inside. I wonder what it's like to stop breathing. Pain makes us alive. Teenage posturing or something more? Now it looked sinister. Witnesses were found who confirmed the worst fears. One acquaintance, a former friend with whom Adrian had stopped speaking a year ago, knew that he had been abusing his dog for years, a small terrier. Adrian treated it cruelly, pulled its tail, locked it in a closet. He got pleasure from it. He would laugh. The friend tried to intervene. They argued. They never spoke again. Several eyewitnesses spoke of the boy's tendency to harm animals. They had seen him throw rocks at cats, catch birds and hurt them. But no one reported it to the authorities. They thought, he's a teenager, he'll grow out of it. His close friend stated that the suspect had repeatedly threatened to jump from a tall building or harm himself in other ways. He spoke about it calmly, matter-of-factly. I'll probably do it one day. The friend didn't take it seriously. Previously, he would sometimes steal small things from stores, money from bags in the school locker room. He used poverty as an excuse, although his mother denied that they lacked for anything. They had a decent apartment, food on the table, clothes. Not wealthy, but respectable. The police took notice of Adrian when he was intently watching the search party as they combed the parking garage. He stood at the entrance, staring without looking away. He stood off to the side, leaning against a wall, his arms crossed over his chest. This was despite the fact that he himself had previously expressed a desire to participate in the search. He was the first to arrive when the volunteer group was announced. He signed up. He was given a vest with the word volunteer on it. It was obvious that the boy was very tense. A detective noticed it. Adrian didn't stand still. He shifted from foot to foot, clenched and unclenched his fists. He was pale, sweating, even though it was cool in the garage. When the police pulled the bag from the dumpster, the young man froze. He stared for a second. Then he bolted and ran, abruptly, without looking back. He ran toward the stairs, out to the street. From the very beginning, he had eagerly participated in the operation, yet he was clearly against searching the underground parking area. When someone suggested checking the garage, Adrian said, "There's nothing to find there. I've already been there. It's all clear." He was insistent. He urged other volunteers to search outside the complex. It now became obvious that the suspect was interested in all this not out of sympathy. He was monitoring the operation to control the situation. He hoped to confuse the investigation, to send it in another direction. As soon as Adrian tried to flee, he was stopped. 2 police officers caught up with him, tackled him to the ground. They handcuffed him. They read him his rights. The boy was taken to the station for questioning. They put him in a room, gray walls, a metal table, 2 cameras in the corners. It was obvious he was hiding something. His eyes darted around. His hands trembled. Despite the lack of a confession and the detectives' suspicions, they decided not to pressure the teenager at first. They offered him water. They questioned him calmly. This was done so that his lawyer could not use it against them later. A violation of interrogation procedure could ruin the case. The detectives also hoped the boy would confess on his own. Sometimes it works. A frightened teenager breaks quickly. To begin, they searched Adrian's apartment. His mother gave permission. She stood in the hallway, crying. The crime scene investigators worked methodically. Here, they found evidence. They found traces. On the carpet in Adrian's room, on the blanket, on the wall by the bed. He had tried to wash them out, but poorly. Stains remained. They were collected with cotton swabs, packaged in test tubes. They were sent to the lab for analysis. After analysis, it was confirmed that the traces belonged to Maddie. The blood type matched. The DNA matched. Now, with solid evidence in hand, they put pressure on the teenager. The interrogation became tougher. According to detectives, Adrian lured the girl into his apartment. It was believed that the boy had offered her ice cream, or to show her a puppy, or a new game, something a young soul couldn't resist. As soon as they were alone, he turned on loud music. Neighbors later recalled hearing rock music coming from his apartment. He attacked her. The first thing he did was tape her mouth shut with wide construction-grade adhesive tape, traces of which remained on her lips and the skin around her mouth. Adrian was brutal. Looking into Madison's eyes, he deprived the girl of the ability to breathe for half an hour. Slowly, not all at once. He would press down, then release. Press down again, until she finally lost consciousness completely. When the victim stopped showing signs of life, stopped moving, stopped breathing, he did what he had intended, taking advantage of her helplessness. Then, he stuffed her into a large sports bag, the same gray one from the storage closet. But before carrying her out of the apartment, he realized the girl was still alive. He heard a wheeze, faint breathing. Her chest was rising. To ensure she wouldn't survive and tell anyone what happened, the perpetrator grabbed a knife from the kitchen, a large kitchen knife. He struck, sharply, forcefully. Splatters of blood hit the wall. Because of this, investigators were able to find traces of evidence in the apartment. There were many. On the floor, on the furniture, even on the ceiling. The droplets had flown far. But even this wound was not immediately fatal for the girl. Her heart was still beating. According to the medical examiner's report, Madi died from positional asphyxia. This means that her position in the dumpster was such that she simply could not breathe properly. She was lying on her side. Her airways were blocked. Her chin was pressed against her chest. And the girl faded away slowly in the darkness. They both knew each other well and saw each other often in the courtyard. Adrian played with the local kids, showing them magic tricks. That's why Madison trusted AJ. When he called her over, she went willingly. She didn't hesitate. The perpetrator simply took advantage of her trust. The district attorney insisted that due to the brutality of the crime, Adrian must be tried as an adult. He argued passionately and convincingly. He believed that this teenager, despite his young age, was a great danger to society. If his freedom was not permanently restricted, it would only lead to new victims. He would harm again. After hearing the prosecutor's arguments, the judge agreed. He nodded. He banged his gavel. The decision was made to try the teenager as an adult. This meant a possible life sentence. The defendant did not plead guilty. He sat on the bench, staring at the floor. He remained silent. His lawyer, a public defender, a young woman, fought actively to have the case transferred back to the juvenile justice system. An expert for the defense, a psychologist with 30 years of experience, argued that Adrian lacked empathy and emotion due to an autism spectrum disorder. He showed diagrams and test results. This, he claimed, was why the defendant constantly tried to downplay the severity of his actions. He didn't understand that he had done something wrong. Regarding the motive, the same specialist explained that Adrian had been watching prohibited materials since childhood. Since he was 9, he preferred videos where women were harmed, where there was cruelty. The defendant confessed to the psychologist in a confidential meeting that he had wanted to take his own life. He had been planning it for a long time. But he didn't want to leave this world without knowing what intimacy was. He felt he would be missing out on something important. At the same time, he wanted to do something truly outrageous. something horrible. Something after which he would have no choice but to be gone. Something that would push him over the edge for good, like a final step. The prosecutor doubted this and countered harshly. He pointed out that the defendant had never made any real attempts to harm himself. No marks on his wrists, no overdoses, only talk. The prosecutor refused to believe this theory. He considered it manipulation. In the preceding years, amendments had been made to California state law. At first, the amendments allowed a judge to decide on an individual basis whether a defendant could be prosecuted as an adult. The judge would study the case and the circumstances and then make a ruling. Then, a new bill was passed that completely prohibited prosecuting teenagers of that age as adults, categorically, without exceptions. All of this resulted in a very controversial trial. It lasted for months. The lawyers filed motions. The court dates were postponed and rescheduled. But initially, Adrian was convicted as an adult. The judge made his decision before the new law came into effect. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Unfortunately, the defense attorney did not stop there. She filed an appeal. She cited the teenager's difficult living conditions, domestic conflicts in his childhood, the societal problems the Gonzalez family faced, poverty, isolation. The defendant himself stated, reading from a sheet in a trembling voice, that he had failed his exams and could not finish school. He suffered from low self-esteem, from the ridicule of other students. They called him strange, an oddball. They avoided him. The accused also claimed that he was often left unsupervised, including in the 8th grade. He spent many nights alone in the apartment while his mother stayed at her boyfriend's house. He ate out of cans, watched TV until morning. No one was supervising him. But everyone who knew Adrian and his mother well rejected these claims. Neighbors said it wasn't true. His mother was home every evening. She cooked dinner. She checked his homework. In his early years, the boy's biological father had indeed been abusive. He drank. He beat the mother. He yelled at his son. However, the mother broke off the relationship almost immediately once the outbursts of aggression became regular. She didn't tolerate it. She filed for divorce. She got a restraining order. She herself was a decent woman who worked hard, 2 jobs to feed her family. Her children and family were the main priority in her life. Adrian was surrounded by attention, love, and care. The woman did everything in her power to provide him with a decent life. She saved for college. She bought him books and clothes. The lawyer continued to press her case. She brought in witnesses. During Adrian's mother's marriage, she had struggled with difficulties. There were problems with alcohol dependency. She would drink in the evenings after work to cope with stress. However, by the time the crime was committed, all of that was long in the past. The mother had quit drinking, completely and irrevocably, when she left her abusive husband. She went to meetings. She stayed sober. The prosecutor insisted on his version of events. He spoke sharply. Despite the unpleasant events in the teenager's life, they were not as severe as the incidents some people face. Many grow up in poverty, in single-parent homes, and experience their parents' divorce, yet they do not become violent criminals. Adrian clearly had a propensity for it. It was innate. Something in his brain wasn't working right. He lacked empathy, a conscience, and the fear of punishment. Curiously, his mother was so shocked by her son's actions that she even refused to testify in his defense at the trial. The lawyer called her as a witness. She came, she took the stand. But all she said was, "I can't." She started crying. She left. The lawyer kept pushing, filing appeals. She used every loophole in the law. It began to yield results. The state Supreme Court agreed to review the case. Fearing a lighter sentence, the deceased girl's parents began to take action. They created a petition on change.org. They collected signatures. The petition opposed mitigating the perpetrator's guilt due to his young age. Thousands of supporters signed it, almost 100,000 in a week. People wrote comments, "He should serve life." But unfortunately, the petition had no legal force. It didn't work. After lengthy discussions, the hearings lasted for days, and several appeals from the defense. The state Supreme Court ruled that the case must be heard in juvenile court. They based this on the new law. Adrian was 15. The law applied to him. The original decision was reviewed. The sentence was overturned. This happened in 2018, 3 years after the tragedy. For several years prior to this, Adrian had been held in an adult county facility. A 3-by-3-meter cell, an iron bunk, a toilet without a partition. He was the youngest inmate. He was kept in isolation for his safety. Other inmates hated those who hurt the weak. They could have harmed him at the first opportunity. Several experts supported the decision to review the case. 9 weeks before the appeal was approved, they conducted a series of interviews with Adrian. They tested him. They assessed the young man as being quite suitable for a rehabilitation program for young offenders. They wrote in their report, "He demonstrates remorse, understands the gravity of his actions, and is ready for rehabilitation. The chances of reform are high." The hearings were scheduled for April 2021. They were postponed twice due to the pandemic. Until this point, Adrian had not fully admitted his guilt. He followed his lawyer's advice, to remain silent, not to testify. Although it didn't matter much, given the irrefutable evidence that had been found. DNA, fingerprints, video, everything pointed to him. Before the new trial began, Adrian Gonzalez radically changed his position. His lawyer likely explained the reality of the situation to him. A guilty plea could lead to a lighter sentence. He listened. He pleaded guilty to all charges against him. He stood up, looked at the judge. He said, "Guilty, guilty, guilty," 6 times. There were 6 charges in total, including abduction and the most heinous one. At the sentencing, the young man spoke. He read from a sheet of paper, stammering. He said he was remorseful for what he had done, that he understood the full gravity of it, that he thinks about Madison every day. He apologized to the girl's family. He turned to them. They were sitting in the front row. The mother stared at the floor. The father clenched his fists. Adrian said, "Forgive me." He expressed hope that one day they might be able to forgive him. His voice trembled, tears on his face. Whether real or feigned, it's hard to say. In response, Mahdi's family said, not immediately, but later through their lawyer, that they simply had no other choice but to try to do so. to try to forgive. The relatives did not want this pain to continue tormenting them forever. They wanted to somehow live on. The girl's mother had suffered from depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder all these years. She couldn't leave the house for weeks at a time. She was afraid of people, of noise, of everything. She couldn't even work. She was let go due to her health. All of this fell as a heavy burden on her husband's shoulders. He had to work for two, taking extra shifts, side jobs. Although he too was going through a difficult time and loved his daughter very much, he just held on. Someone had to hold on. Under the adult justice system, the guilty party faced a sentence of 126 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. If he had been tried as an adult, he would have remained incarcerated forever, guaranteed. But the law for minors was much more lenient, a different philosophy, the idea of the possibility of reform, that young people can change. Thanks to the overturned decision, Adrian was granted eligibility for release in 10 years when he turns 25. Just 10 years for taking the life of and abducting a young girl. He could be released in 2025. The expert, that same psychologist, spoke with him in prison several times. He concluded that Adrian has a low risk of committing another serious crime, that he does not have psychopathy, that he is amenable to treatment and rehabilitation. Naturally, all of these decisions outraged the city's public and all concerned citizens. People held rallies outside the courthouse. They held signs, "Justice for Mahdi. Life means life." They advocated for toughening California's existing legislation. They demanded the law be revised. In essence, it all resembled a parody of justice. The girl is gone. The perpetrator will be out in 10 years. Where is the logic? Many stated that such an atrocity could not have been committed by a sane person who is capable of being rehabilitated, especially not in just 10 years. What could be rehabilitated in that time? He knew what he was doing. He deprived her of air for half an hour. That's not an impulse. That's a choice. The requirement for him to register as a dangerous offender for life also seemed unconvincing. It only meant that his neighbors would know. But what good would that do? And the order to pay $22,000 in restitution to the Middleton family. Money. As if that could compensate for anything. Maddie's grandfather, the girl's paternal grandfather, spoke at the sentencing hearing. An elderly man with a cane. He spoke loudly and clearly. He spoke out against it. He did not accept Adrian's apology at all. He declared that this amendment to the law, which allows such dangerous people to walk free, will have horrifying consequences in the future. It sets a precedent. Others will see, you can do something terrible and get out in 10 years. This is wrong. These people likely have a higher risk of reoffending. They will do something terrible again. They will harm again. The statistics are not on the side of rehabilitation. He looked at the judge as he said this. The judge listened, but the decision had already been made. After all these tragic events, a very close, strange bond formed between the mothers of the convicted and the victim. Both had lost their children. one literally, the other figuratively. The woman, Adrian's mother, was so devastated by her son's actions that she turned her back on him. She didn't visit him. She didn't write letters. She didn't answer his calls. Adrian's mother repeatedly told reporters, friends, everyone, "For me, my son left with Madison that same day. I lost my son when he did that. The boy I knew is gone." The victim's mother, Laura, believed that she was not to blame for what her son did. They would meet by chance in the courtyard, on the street. At first, they avoided each other. Then they started talking. They both supported each other. No one else could understand their pain the way they understood each other's. Neighbors frequently saw them sitting together on the bench by the memorial, in silence or crying, just sitting side by side. A memorial was created in honor of Madison in the courtyard of the tannery complex. A small statuette, bronze, cast by a local artist, a wolf howling at the moon, just as she used to draw. She loved those animals very much. The plaque at its base reads, "In memory of Madison Middleton, our chatterbox Maddie, forever young." People brought flowers, toys. Someone left a drawing of a wolf. Someone else wrote a note. The mothers of the victim and the perpetrator often sat here together. In the evenings, when the courtyard was empty, they would look at the statuette. They wouldn't talk. They were just present. In February 2025, just a few months ago, the parole board held a hearing. Adrian, now a 24-year-old young man, submitted a petition. He spoke before the board. He talked about his remorse, the work he had done on himself, his therapy. The board ruled that Adrian would not be released from custody. Not now. He will remain in confinement for at least 2 more years, after which he can petition again. And so it will continue. A new hearing every 2 years, until he is allowed to be released, or until he passes away in custody. Unfortunately, the tragic events did not end there. Madison was cremated after all the examinations were complete. The ceremony was quiet, private. Only close relatives attended. Her father carried his daughter's ashes in his car, in a small urn on the passenger seat. It was his own way of coping with the bitterness of his loss. He would talk to the urn. He would tell her how his day went. It gave the man strength, a feeling that she was still close, that she wasn't completely gone. However, a few years after the tragedy, in 2019, his car was broken into at night in a mall parking lot. The window was smashed and the car was stolen. It was found a week later, abandoned, empty, along with the ashes which had been thrown out somewhere. The urn was gone. The ashes were scattered. The Middleton family was unable to hold on to even the last trace of their only child. Even that was taken from them.